This is IBM Museum. In this video, I wanted to show inside my complete Type 2 and Type 3 Model 80 units. You did see on the previous video as I'm putting the Type 1 planer into the Model 80 case and how open it is in the middle. And this unit here, being my Type 2, is a little bit different from that. I've got the unit set up on the table here with the stands out, rotated out from beneath the bottom to give it some stability. The front of the unit is towards the right, the rear of the unit towards me, and so we're looking at effectively what would be viewed as the left-hand side of the system as we, if we're in front of the unit looking at it face on. And of course there's a lock at the top of this case, just a standard tubular IBM lock that they had at that time. And for the access panel, there's these two large screws here and with coin slots in them. And so a quarter or a nickel works fine to rotate these around and to be able to pull off this panel. And I'll show also the trick to kind of seating these panels as well. And so you just, once the screws are loose, you just pull this panel out. Now I want to go through and spin this around just to show one of the things that you'll run into with the Model 60, 65SX, and Model 80 cases, in that IBM had this foam on the inside to in positions for pressing against the cards, like the memory modules, or down here where the adapters were, there's a piece of foam that was in front here. You can kind of see the relief where those adapters that were at the bottom of the case are pressing into that. And here's the lower air baffle. It does have, or is supposed to have, some of this foam around that air baffle at the top, and then there's strips of foam that go in this area as well, and typically that's what it is that you're left with, is that these strips that are the outer covering of this foam. But as you can see, this stuff just crumbles, and it's like I describe them as a fresh brownie. It's a gooey mess. It gets your fingers and thumbs dirty. That's why I was working on the case of the Type 1 the other day. And the PS2 hobbyists that encounter this stuff, it's an absolute mush. We've tried to come up with some replacements in this case for and it just falls down, and the pieces, these sticky pieces, just go everywhere. It's horrible stuff. And see, that's a kind of a covering, the outer strip that used to go up here. And so it's just something you have to deal with these cases. My finger's getting sticky. It has the bud parts that are stuck here to it. I'll take this cover out of the way. We do even have a piece that's stuck here, and it puts this black residue on the stuff it touches, and so it's just it's awful. Now, once we're inside the case, we can see the two full-sized SCSI hard drives, and that's probably added later. I may have even been the one that went through and added these, and it's kind of a strange arrangement. I'd have to really study why I did this, but the SCSI cable in the middle of there is kind of flipped over and crimped between the two units. It seems like one of the drive faces is different from what it should be, because this should be the top of the full-size case as you have it. The rails are at the lower section, and they lock into that drive cage that we saw when I was in the Type 1. And I'll show going through and pulling these components out of here in the drive cage just to access that where that CPU is on this Type 2 planer, and showing how tucked away that thing is in the instance after IBM moved it from the position it was on the Type 1s. I do have some, looks like some aftermarket power connections for those hard drives as well. Now this unit with the two hard drives and their full-size hard drives, that contributes to, this thing is around 55 pounds. One of the heavier units, but at least it has the handle on the top, right? And I've actually seen one of these handles, I've got a broken one that I had. I don't know if I was the one breaking it, that moving the unit around, or someone else. I just received it that way. But with these heavy units and that carry handle, that can break. And a general layout inside, and as I say, I'll kind of do some areas as we get into that area below the hard drives. But you have the power supply up here on top, and that's where the drive connections are for power here. The Model 80 being a little bit different, that it has those separate Molex type power connections for the standard drives that would be on these systems, either MFM or ESDI at the low end of the Model 80 spectrum, up to the SCSI drives that were even full size, and then they had adapters for the 3.5-inch drives that were in this drive cage as well, being that those drives are a little bit smaller. And I went over, of course, the power supply. We see a little bit of the connections that we saw before, of the memory connectors for those memory modules. And as I say, these modules are really tucked back in there. That it would be hard to get your fingers down there to release the latches with the Type 3 planer. In this case, on the Type 2, I still do have those 4 megabyte modules here because they're recognized at that full capacity. But we see where they'll stick up now that we've seen the loose planer being out of the case, and it becomes a little bit more evident of where actually everything fits in. To the right here is the A drive on top, and then in this B drive bay, they actually have an insert, and I got an idea from this insert. What it does is that, I'll show in a moment, where it takes the cable down to a passive adapter for putting that connection out to an external drive, and I'll kind of go through that when I show the adapters. But that's what the bay adapter looks like, and I've thought of a use for some sort of a similar assembly on the floppy drive replacements that we're coming up with. This kind of made me think of that idea, that it basically has the connections just like that floppy drive would. And on IBM, these edge connectors, it slides in, and the cable is not loose on the back end of this assembly. It actually holds that connector in place. And so they make the connection, and it just has a couple chips here, and takes it to this 34-pin cable, and goes down back behind the drive carrier and everything, down to the adapter here, the passive adapter here. Let's move down to the right for a moment before we do get to those adapters. Here is the stand for the kind of the pillar for the battery on top, and speaker, or it's thought of as a speaker pillar or battery and speaker pillar. And that has the standard batteries that IBM had for a lot of its PS2s, the 223 battery. And the for the Duracell ones, those can be over $10 guaranteed, but even $13, $15 USD for these. And so it's nice to find an economical source for some of these batteries, because you do go through them with the most of the models of the PS2s have that identical battery. And I think I've found the source, but I want to make sure that they are not just selling older stock that they have that maybe expired. These lithium batteries have a good shelf life of about 10 years, is what they advertise them at. And I want to make sure that of that source before I go through and talk a little bit more about that to refer people to gain those batteries. I want to make sure that they're of the quality that that people are buying. Now, on the lowest adapter, and that lowest adapter microchannel adapter slot is slot 1. It looks like it has an Intel adapter with memory on it, 30 pin SIMs, and probably has, I believe, well, it doesn't have any external connections, but it's got some connectors there that I don't know if that's parallel or serial multifunction sort of thing that's added on to that adapter. But we can look at that once we have it out of the case a little bit more. The next adapter up is that passive adapter that it basically sits in a slot. It doesn't have an ADF or any configuration to it. It's just purely in that adapter slot to get power for the few chips that are on that board, and also provide that connection point for the external diskette drive. And those drives are the 4869 drives. In this case, with the passive adapter, you can only use the 4869-001 external drive, which is 360 KB. So that's the low capacity 5 1/4 diskette. And the IBM did have a later replacement for that called the diskette adapter A, that had a, of course, was a fully populated microchannel board, had set up, even had a driver that you had to load, DOS driver that you loaded as the system would set up during its boot process. And that, with the external connection for diskette drives, was able to run also the 4869-002 model, which is 1.2 megabyte. So I'll be demonstrating installing that diskette adapter A later on, probably put it on the 55SX, because we don't have this sort of elaborate where we fill the bay with that bay adapter and have that extra slot basically to waste, just because we want to get that connection external to the unit. And I also have these on my Model 70, and I'll show them off in a little bit more detail on what I plan for a similar assembly of that bay adapter, probably when I demonstrate the Model 70. Now, that passive adapter is in slot 3. We're skipping over slot 2, skipping over slot 4 as well, getting to this Mark III COM board, and that's a network adapter card, Ethernet. It looks like the 3COM 3C523 card, rather old adapter. It's 10 megabit per second adapter. Now, Charles on the Facebook group, and he's been a longtime contributor on the SIF news group as well, sold PS2 systems and parts throughout the years. I've bought many of my systems, as well as other news group members have from him as well. He's going through and still selling systems, still building systems to sell. And when he popped in a 523 card a few days ago, it blew a capacitor on the adapter when he powered it up and shorted out the adapter. Thankfully, it didn't damage the power supply or anything else of the unit more, but it just one of those things with the aging capacitors and everything else, and kind of give him a little bit of a highlight to his day that way by releasing the smoke and effectively making an adapter non-functional with losing that capacitor. So that being in slot 5, we skip over slot 6 and 7. There's no adapter present for those. And we get to slot 8, which is the highest microchannel slot in this case. And that actually looks to be an Adaptec SCSI adapter. It's not a IBM SCSI. And that does have the external connector, but it's primarily, in this case, of course, used for running those 2 internal full-size drives. And so that's a brief overview of once we've got that access panel open to the inside components, and I'll actually go from here to pulling these parts out, and we can look at it further, getting down to where the CPU and floating point unit chip, or if it's not there, the empty socket is on these units for the thought of like a CPU upgrade on these. Now we're going to go through, since we're removing the hard drives out of here, let's go ahead and pull this front panel off as well. And that's just grabbing it down here at the bottom. And this is sitting up against the table, or on the table, so I have to kind of get access to pull it. And of course the bezel block up drop is loose as well. But there is the front panel of this unit, and we just needed that space open to be able to slide this drive out as we pull it out of the system. Okay, and we're going through and zooming in a little bit on the hard drive area, and I've gone through and I've taken the access cover out of the way. I've gone through and tried to clear that nasty foam out of the way for setting these components down once I get them loose. For the drive cage here with these little spin pieces, of course lefty loosey, righty tighty, just rotating those through to the counterclockwise to release them. And we'll go through, and you're actually going through with this drive in what's considered the forward bay, and basically sliding that forward outside the front of the case. And we'll go through and disconnect the SCSI cable, power cables here as I go and clear that out of the way and set that in the table on the front. And that leaves this other drive in the bay, in the rear bay, and we're going to go through and attempt to slide this forward as well. Do I have that? Guess I didn't have that one release all the way loose. Now what I do is quite a bit easier to move. I'm disconnecting that power supply connection and the SCSI cable here. This is on the end of the SCSI chain for this particular drive, and this is probably the primary drive. I'd have to look at once I get things fired up, and I can look at what SCSI ID and what I had set up as the actual boot drive. And I guess that is effectively the bottom of the drive where those rails are. This is kind of a strange, this is almost like a reverse, where the connections, power connections, SCSI connections on the back here. And one of those odd Seagate drives. I think this one was, to look a little bit closer, I had even the 9 gigabyte drives, which were huge at the time, the huge size. And I don't know if I can get these cables out of the way to be able to see the CPU daughter card that I have underneath here. Of course, normally this would be the 386DX 20 megahertz in this connection here in the socket, and then the 387 socket is over here, and that puts them right below that brace for the hard drive cage. This is actually a 46 board. The 46 is CPU is actually under this other brace of the drive cage as well, and so it's kind of hard to even see in there for this view with even the drive cage in there. And but that shows with a CPU daughter card plugged in that socket, it's right below that drive cage. And for that being the 46 DX33, I mean, that generates quite a bit of heat, and at least it's below that fan, but in those cramped conditions it doesn't really get the ventilation that was probably intended for that. And this is it was made by a company called Hypertech. It's a HyperAce adapter CPU, and they had different models that they made for the Model 70, the Model P70, which is a portable unit, and the Model 80. And so this is, I think they define this as the 46B version that goes in the Model 80. And so let me go through and I'll get a screwdriver and we'll take out this drive cage as well. And hopefully this little shorty screwdriver I have will work to loosen these. And I'm going to probably go through, let's get the drive power cables out of the way. And with this drive cage in place, it's even still harder to access the area where those memory modules are as well, to get your hands in there and get those out of there. So this may even be a process for replacing the modules. You may have to go through and unload this hard drive cage and loosen all the screws, the 4 screws here at the front. Okay, we've got those 4 screws loose, and it's nice that it's got a pin here at the front that's a friction friction lock in place. So we bring that drive cage out like that, and it's locked into the back with these pins. That may have been more visible in that other video. And I may have to see about routing this SCSI cable a little bit better as well, now that I've gone through and tear down the unit. But at least we can see that Hypertech CPU daughter card, and I mean that thing sits out away from the planer by close to 3/8 to half an inch away from the planer. And so we've got that. I suppose if we wanted to go through and install a CPU upgrade or switch back to the original or whatever from there, we've got that that all exposed to get at that. So I'm going to go through and in this case I'm going to start assembling this again and just show the way to get everything back in place, get those access covers back on, and then we can go through and look at the Type 3. Okay, I'm finally back after reworking a lot of the internals of the system, and that's mainly in rerouting that internal SCSI cable to the drives, from the adapter to the drives. And I just didn't like it going under the drive cage and going across that CPU daughter card the way it was. And I still do have the drives connected in the same way, where I have this drive at the end of the chain. It may do termination or something else on this drive, the reason I've had it set up that way. But these drives back to back, it really doesn't work out good for how the cables are connected to them, and coming up from that adapter connection. So I may kind of relook at this later on. I even tried cabling with a that had been separated, just because I have some twists in there, and it didn't work out. This is the original cable I had in there, and I chose a cable. I've got quite a few of these things, and so I chose a cable that has more spacing between the drive connections and a little bit less from that adapter to the first drive spacing, and it worked out well enough in that regard. It is just on the outside of that drive cage. I've tried to have it closer to the drive cage metal off of the components that are on that Adaptec SCSI adapter, in case they get warm. But I know that if I lose something just because that cable is adjacent to something, cause it to heat up, I'm sure that Adaptec SCSI card generates less heat than what the 46DX33 does. And these Adaptec cards, I have more of them. They're bound to be easier for me to replace one of those than that Hypertech CPU daughter card that's in there. And I'll get looking at the future. I may go through and I may figure out whether there's a real need for me to have two full-sized SCSI drives in this unit. I think at the time I was just doing it because I had they both had a lot of capacity to them, and I had a system that basically I could use as a file server or something else. So get in there further when I fire it up, get it configured to determine what's on there and things like that. Now, also I went through, and since I don't have to run through any configuration, I actually moved that passive external diskette adapter up to just below the Adaptec SCSI adapter, and just so I could do the cable routing a little bit more. For a passive adapter, I don't have to go through any reconfiguration of the system at all. It's not that sensitive, and it doesn't matter where that external connection for the diskette drive comes out the back of any of those 8 slots, really, to me. So that was just a little bit of reorganizing there as well. I could move that 3 comma card around and get it so there's equal spacing between the adapters, in this case for ventilation to move over them and stuff like that. But I also have to look with them all laid. You have to look at it. If you go to adjacent slot, you may be going from a 16-bit slot and taking up a space of a 32 bit slot for another adapter, or that may be more useful or something there. And I have to evaluate with that 3COM card. That may be an older, old enough adapter that I may want to just replace it with something different, a newer version of that adapter. And I mean, they're all pretty much all 10 megabit cards, but there may be that option. And of course, if I change out those adapters as well, the thought, or even move that on a slot, you have to reconfigure it. If you've gone through and have a good battery and good configuration, and you change any adapters around, you're going to have to reconfigure the system from the reference diskette in this case. So, and we get a little bit better view of the Intel memory adapter at the bottom. I really haven't decided on that. I may even go through and pull that. It is a 32-bit adapter, and it does have a keyway cutout, so it can also fit in a 16-bit slot. But I don't know whether I may go through and replace those with the memory adapters that I showed on the previous video. Just to I'll just have to look at that capacity of that memory and see what it really does for me. All it is it's just a memory board. I don't know what the other connection is, whether that's additional daughter card or something else that can be linked in this case, to that connector. I've got to look it up for the page online and kind of figure out a little bit more detail and see a little bit more of the capacity. But just in the rerouting of everything is what I wanted to do and kind of show and explain for all that. And so I'm going through and putting the system back together, that we can go through and put the front piece back on. And that's just going through, and it hooks in at the top. And then I knocked out that cover again. That thing is not in there all that tight. Just shows you where you can put pressure and where you can't put pressure. Okay. And I tell you, I'm having more trouble with that than I should. Okay. So that's back on, and I've gone through and removed a little bit, the loose pieces at least, of that foam. And if you have ideas for what could be used as a replacement for that foam in there as well, that might be handy to know. We've tried some different things. I know there's been different suggestions on the news group. Now, you put the bottom aligned right. You don't necessarily have to get those bottom corners all the way in when you do this. And the best way, and then you go through and real sensitive on position, but you can get it to where you can get that top in, and if these corners are still out a little bit, you just go through and push those in, and they latch at the bottom. And then of course tightening those screws. So next up, I'm not going to spend as much time on the Type 3 system. It's a little bit more open. I don't have any drives in that drive cage on it. So that'll be a little bit quicker to go over that unit. But that's all we have for looking on the insides of that Type 2 system I have. Okay, and I've gone through and moved the camera back a little bit to form my complete system with the Type 3 planer. And moved it on top of the table. I wanted to show going through and putting out the feet now that I've moved the system, or thought that you grab the handle and you take it someplace, that when you get to where it's going to be, you just go through and reach down and spin these feet out, and there you have a lot more stability. And you can see how tall these units are. I've actually heard of them being used as tablelands. That you have two of them, and you put a board or a door over the top of them, and you have yourself basically a little table. But I've already gone through and I've loosened the screws to the access panel. We're going to go through and pop the access cover off. This one is in a little bit better shape. There's not really any loose foam, although the foam that's here is still a bit sticky, and kind of that consistency of brownies, still fresh brownies. And we're going to set that down. And then there has been that foam. I mean, it does have some gooey pieces in here for the Kingston card that has the little drive and memory slots. That's an IDE laptop drive that's on there, and that's the reason I don't have any hard drives in this drive cage, even on the smaller adapters for the 3.5 inch or anything like that. This is the Type 3, so it does have the latches for the RAM modules, and I've got those adapters I demonstrated in the prior video. I've got 2 of those down there that are fully populated, so that's even 12 megabyte of RAM that's there, along with the 4 and 4 here. So I have a straight 20 megabyte of RAM on this system right now, and even without any of these SIMs populated, this configured with any memory for this DC32 Kingston card. And I actually went through, and the other day I fired it up just to see, and I mean the battery still has a charge, so it went through and started up the OS. It looked like it has MS-DOS on it, at least initially, and then I received a virus warning that is on the drive. I may go through and actually do a video clip of that, going through and booting it up, and told me to run the rescue diskette to clean that virus, and I'll have to see what I do for that to get that drive, IDE drive configured. And who knows, I might even go through there. It'd be nice knowing what I have on there, but I might go through there and I have adapters for the IDE connections. I may even try on a newer system, putting in a dock just to even look over the contents, or that maybe as a way of going through and cleaning that drive from viruses. And on this system, I do have what IBM called the Blue Lightning CPU daughter card, and that's got an IBM 46 DLC2 CPU. So that runs at 66 megahertz, and with the 16 kilobyte of cache, actually runs a very fast system. It's a nice thing to have that IBM had for its Model 70s and Model 80s, and that's why it's got all these weird notches and for all those different orientations, or all those things that it could be close to, fitting in these different systems. And it does kind of have a corner in over the top of the 387DX chip that I have in the socket of the T3, the Type 3 planer. But that adapter works well, and it does, at least in this instance, it doesn't have the drive seen over the top of that as well. And of course, this is a cache controller that we saw in the one of the prior videos looking over the Type 3, and then the 386DX socket being right there below that brace. So if you have a 386 CPU in these units, it ends up being right below these braces of this drive cage. And I mean, it's good that those CPUs don't really typically need any heat sink or anything else on them, but you don't have any space to work with in that case if you have this big drive cage there. And there may be an instance where, like this, where if I don't have any drives in that drive cage, just to even pull it out of there, to have that open space. And that might be something I do with the Type 1 as well. I plan on switching that Kingston adapter over there to have the Kingston components basically all in one system. And I'll go through and even see what RAM memory I may have in those, and see this is a real nice card to have in the system as well for the hard drive and the memory additions. These typically you can put a little bit more SIMs that have a little bit higher capacity on these adapters, and that can beat out even having the 20 megabyte like I do for the system, which is a good number to have on this level of CPU. This could even run Windows 95 well enough. Certainly OS 2 is an option for some of the older flavors of OS 2, but it turns into being a really capable system with that CPU daughter card and the amount of memory I have on it. So let's close up this case. And I think that's going to be most all the video, unless I do decide to do a clip on firing this up. And there's not much to see. It just goes through and starts up DOS, and then it warns me that I've got to run the clean disk yet. So I think that's a good place to end. If you do enjoy this video, please click on that like button. Please subscribe to my channel for this sort of content. And certainly if you do have any requests for videos of particular systems, leave those in the comments below. This is IBM Museum. Thank you.